What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing light and storytelling in street photography and how we can use light to create a more emotionally impactful photograph, as ultimately, of course, light gives shape and form to surfaces, people, places, and moments that we capture, but it also evokes the mood of our photograph. And so I want to highlight here in this slideshow some of my photographs, as well as dissect some case studies from some of the masters of photography to give you a better understanding of how we can use light and storytelling in street photography. And so here at this scene in Baltimore, I photographed during a house fire. And of course, we have this very tense and dramatic moment of the boy engaged with the shirt, covering his face, revealing his tense eyes. But it's the surprise of that light that's glowing from the smoke on the right-hand side that create this visual story. And we have the woman emerging from the smoke, covering her face. And these gestures, of course, help carry the viewer's eye, but it's the light that gives this emotional response for the viewer through the use of light and the way it's glowing at the scene. You know, there's this emotional response and a mood that can be evoked through the use of light. And so as much as light simply gives shape and form to things, it also creates a sense of mood in our pictures. And so I believe that light shapes the story of an image. It's more than just an illumination of something. It creates mood, emotion, and narrative depth. Here in Penn's Landing, Philadelphia, I photographed a very beautiful scene using artificial light from the Ferris wheel on the right-hand side in that beautiful blue color. And we have this juxtaposition between the woman inside her ticket booth and a more isolated scene. We have a relationship here, using the way in which light and gesture tell a story. I was able to enhance the way in which I tell the narrative here and create a more interesting and more compelling photograph where the light itself, using the artificial light itself, helps me tell this story, isolating the subject in the foreground, juxtaposing her against that joyous moment in the background. We create this sort of tension and this emotion within the frame through the way in which light evokes a mood. I find light itself is what shapes the photograph. Light itself is what creates the emotional impact in a photograph. It's not necessarily just because of the emotion in the frame or the facial expression, gesture, or moment itself, but the types of light that we photograph, I believe, can evoke this mood, this emotion in a frame. And so I find it very important to go out and to photograph throughout all times of the day, where the warm light of the golden hour can create a more nostalgic or intimate scene. The cool light of the blue hour can become more distant and cinematic. The high contrast midday sun creates tension and drama, where the low-key light can become more mysterious and anonymous through the use of light, through the use of shadows and silhouettes. Where here at the scene in Baltimore, we have a much more intimate moment that I photographed between a brother and sister, and we have these long looming shadows that are casted from the golden hour, and we have that beautiful soft light that's glowing upon the skin of the girl. With that very simple gesture in that moment between the two subjects in the frame, synthesized with this golden hour beautiful warm light, we create a more impactful photograph. And I find that the way in which light and moment combine can become much more engaging for a viewer's eyes, where I find that the best narratives unfold naturally, and it's not necessarily something that you need to go out there and look for, right? These moments, these kind of things kind of just happen naturally, and the most mundane scene can become elevated to a new height through the way the light interacts, through the way the long looming shadows cast. And these different interplays between subjects can become elevated in our frame through the use of light. And so here we have an example of the blue hour, where I'm photographing a bit after the sunset. We have cool light at this scene, and it's a much more cinematic photograph as we have this foggy atmosphere, right? The rain just fell. We have emotion in the frame. It's something very simple. You don't have an impactful gesture. You don't have an impactful moment, but the mood is evoked in the frame through the use of light, through the way these foggy scenes evoke a sense of mystery and a cinematic feel. You know, we have that artificial light bouncing off the river on the right-hand side in combination with that blue, cool light. And I find that shooting at all times of day, whether the light is warm or cool, can create a different mood and impact in our frames. Where during this scene here in Zambia, Africa, I was photographing the midday sun, we have a more tense moment here at the scene. We have this dramatic effect through the use of shadow play. And so the high contrast light of the midday sun was emphasized in this picture through the way I positioned the subject in relationship to this shadow from the pole and the way it's casted upon his face, revealing his eye. You know, the midday sun is tense. It creates a dramatic feel. And I find that by photographing in the midday sun, the use of high contrast can evoke this feeling, this drama in a frame due to the way the shadows are casted upon the face. And so in low-key light situations, I believe we can evoke a sense of mystery through the use of silhouettes. And so here at the scene in Philadelphia, I photographed this man emerging from the background as the pigeons fly in the foreground, illuminated from the background. We have this beautiful wall here that separates the subjects, that separates the silhouettes in the frame, adding this emotional impact, this an anonymous sort of mysterious feeling in the frame where ultimately you don't need a face, you don't need a gesture, you don't need much of a moment itself. I mean, obviously we have this pigeon flying and there's a lot of energy at the scene, but it's not something that you can clearly see. It's much more obscured through the use of shadows. And so we can use shadows, we can use highlights and these different elements in our frames to create narratives where the shadows create secrecy and drama, and the highlights can isolate a subject and guide the viewer's eye. We're here at this scene in Baltimore. I'm photographing through a car window, and I'm illuminating the subject here in the foreground, using light and shadow to my advantage, guiding the viewer's eye to the left-hand side, revealing the shadow there on the left in the background, where the high contrast can emphasize this sense of isolation with our subjects in the frame, revealing what matters in the highlights and crushing the shadows. I find to be a very simple technique to create more depth in our images. And so here in Baltimore, once again, using light and shadow to create this isolation within my frame, emphasizing the gesture of the man smoking the cigarette, obscuring his face through the use of shadow play, juxtaposing this tense moment with the boy's gesture playing at the scene, we create a more dramatic effect, crushing the shadows in the background and revealing what matters, and isolating the subject and the moment itself in the foreground creates a much more impactful, both visually and emotionally, frame. And so light can capture the emotion of a scene, where honestly, as much as we can photograph an emotional moment like here in Zambia, Africa, of a man mourning at the scene as a funeral is unfolding and the man in the background is burying the dead, I find that the way the light is casted upon the scene is what's creating this dramatic effect. We have the way light is diffused through the smoke at the scene. We have the way the gesture is emphasized because of the light casted upon the face. And these different elements of light can actually create a more dramatic and emotionally impactful effect and carry a photograph. And so when I'm out there on the streets, I'm not necessarily looking for the most emotionally impactful moment. That was a case study of me photographing emotion. But honestly, sometimes the light itself can carry the emotional impact of a scene of a simple woman lounging here on the left-hand side in Paris, gesturing to her face, basking in that midday sun, glowing in the light, evokes a mood. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have these three subjects underneath the boardwalk here in Coney Island in a much more softer light condition because of the way I'm underneath the bridge and because of the way the light is illuminated at the scene in this much more soft effect. We have a much more joyous impact where we have tension and drama on the left-hand side and joy and softness on the right-hand side. And so we'll be looking at some different examples here from Fan Ho to Alex Webb and Saul Leiter to discuss more deeply how these photographers use light to create narratives in their frames. And so here's an example of Alex Webb photographing maybe mid or late afternoon. We have some harsh light and tension that's formed through the use of light. And so Fan Ho is one of the famous photographers that uses light and shadow play to create these narrative photographs that feel very cinematic when looking at them as a viewer. And here's an example of him using backlight to illuminate the subjects in his frame. And I find the most beautiful thing about using light in a photograph is not only the way it can create a mood, can create an emotional response for a viewer, but the way in which it can give you as the photographer the ability to photograph something so seemingly mundane like people here in a bus station or a train station and elevating it to a new height through the use of light. And so remember when you're out there that you can photograph anything. You don't need to be in an exotic location like some of these photographers or even some of my photographs. You don't need to go out there and look for any crazy decisive moment, but you can photograph and uplift such a seemingly mundane thing due to the use of light and create this emotional impact for a viewer. And so here I photographed in my hometown, Philadelphia, pigeons in flight. But because of the way in which the light is casted at the scene and emerging from the background, you have a much more dramatic effect as the light is interacting with the pigeon on the left-hand side of the frame. And the way the silhouettes are formed on the right-hand side create this drama, create this narrative, and create this joyous and emotionally impactful energy due to the use of light. And so Alex Webb is somebody who crushes the shadows and exposes for the highlights, and one of my favorite photographers who uses light to carry his narratives. And here at the scene, we have a combination of both the glowing, warm light of the golden hour on the right-hand side as this man and woman are engaged emotionally at the scene, revealing that moment in the light, crushing in the background the silhouette of the father and daughter interacting at the scene. We have a few different elements here. We have 1, 2, 3 interactions, a very simple frame, in my opinion, very easy frame to look at. It's very visually impactful, but because he uses light and layers light through the complexities of light and shadow and the way they interact at the scene, he was able to create this much more dramatic narrative effect. And I think this photograph here is one of the most beautiful examples of using light and shadow to tell a story, to create a more narrative impact, where he's layering the light, he's exposing people in the light and crushing the shadows and using the formal elements of composition and light and story to create this emotionally impactful photograph. And so here at the scene, I photographed in a much different situation. I have a photograph in Mumbai where we have a few different subjects interacting at the scene, layered complexity, right? We have a lot of different things going on here, a bird in flight, but it's the light that gives shape and form to the surfaces here. It's the light that allows the viewers, that allows the subject's gestures to become visible, where we have this joyous smile on the left-hand side. We have this smile very clearly visible due to the golden glow, that warm light of the golden hour. We have these simple gestures and simple moments and interactions from the foreground of the boy and the background of the couple. There's something about light and the way that it can evoke a mood. It's something very simple, really. The golden warm light can evoke this sense of joy. There's something about the way in which you can photograph at different times of the day to create different narratives in our frames. And so Saul Leiter is somebody who created more poetic imagery, abstracting reality through his compositions. And I found this photograph to be an example of his work that resonates with me, and the way he obscures the moment and obscures things through reflective surfaces is very intriguing. And I've used this technique here in Philadelphia, shooting through a reflective surface, shooting through a window, allowing the abstractions and the different reflections to carry the narrative of my frame and to create this sense of mood and mystery through the use of light and shadow play, isolating the silhouette against the bright backdrop on the left-hand side. And so there's a few different techniques that we just looked at, and a few different ways in which different photographers has used light and shadow to create a more impactful frame. And I encourage you to go out there and to put these different ideas into practice. And so ultimately, the main thing I want to emphasize here for you to go out there and do is photograph a scene where light itself tells the story. Here in Mexico City, when I photographed this particular scene, I was simply intrigued by the way the light illuminated on the surface of the background and the way the mural was revealed and the way the shadows interacted and were casted at the scene. And the subject in my frame, he came to me. I was simply there and intrigued by the light. And sometimes this surprise of a moment can bring you a delight through following the light and just being intrigued by light itself. Where here I was photographing on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, looking at this mirror in a garbage bin, and the way the light was reflecting off of the mirror drew me in like a fly going to the light. And I was there and I was patient and I was photographing as the light was reflected off of the surface. And as I was simply intrigued by the light itself, this subject with the cigarette came into my frame. And so sometimes when you're out there and you're simply following the light and curious about the light, things and narratives and people will naturally unfold through you simply being curious about light itself. So I encourage you to go out there and to follow the light and to chase the light and to photograph because of the light. You know, sometimes the photographs you make can emerge naturally through you simply being curious about light itself. And so recognize that great street photography, it is about storytelling. It is about synthesizing both the content, right? The moment itself, the gestures, the emotional response of the subjects in your frame with strong form, with strong composition and strong light. And synthesizing the content with form and light can help you master street photography. And having these three elements combine in a frame can help carry the photograph and create a narrative through the use of light and the way it evokes a mood in your photograph. And so, yeah, I encourage you to go out there and put these ideas into practice. It's the only way you will improve your photography. Use some of my ideas and some of these slideshows as a foundation for you, but ultimately go out there and put them into practice and do the thing itself. And I encourage you to keep shooting, keep walking, keep exploring, and keep following the light. And so, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.